There are some real madmen in the criminal fraternity. There are some guys in there who had no boundaries and enjoyed the violence. They enjoyed slashing people. They enjoyed hacking people. And for me to operate at that level, you had to demonstrate that you were capable of wanton violence. But if I say this to you, I've known just as many police officers who had similar problems in their head than some of these criminals. These guys are just as mad as the criminals sometimes. It would be easier to tell you what I didn't do undercover. I never killed anyone. I never stuck a needle in my arm. Everything else, you can take it that I did. And I'm not proud of them. I was under the same suspicion that everyone else was under. So there are times when you're tested to the full. I've been taken out into a field and knew that there were firearms and put under a lot of pressure to divulge that I was a police officer. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I thought it might be the end of days there and then. You can't for 1 minute think of yourself as anything other than one of them. I was a police officer for 30 years. I was mainly involved in criminal investigation work across the country. I became involved in surveillance work. The longest I ever did was 9 weeks undercover. I probably was directly responsible for half a dozen crime gang bosses, either being locked up or being prosecuted or being dealt with, which I mean they didn't get prosecuted but turned and became informants to different levels. So how do you manage being a UC? The answer is that you become two people. That's as simple as that. The more truth you can weave into your legend, the better. There were parts of my life at the time that I used in my legend, because I could speak with absolute authority about it. How do you infiltrate an organisation? At the bottom level is the answer to that. Very, very seldom you get an introduction at any other level, and sometimes you have to go through the barrier of being the stranger. I would suggest you've got between 5 and 10 minutes in a strange environment before the first person will come over, because it's territorial. There's locals, there's people that are in there every day in life. You have to pass that test first and foremost to be in the place. It's just to be there and let the place envelope you. Criminals are pretty boring 99.9% of their lives. They still go shopping, school runs to do. So most of undercover work, most of surveillance work is static, watching, waiting. The other 1% is absolute mayhem. I remember looking for bank robbers. We suspected that they were using a certain public house, and my job with another UC at that time was just to be there. And we were there for over a week. And strangely enough, one of the things that had been used in nearly all the robberies, I was brought into the bar one night and put behind the bar. And we knew right away that we had the right people in the right place. And we actually intercepted them on the job, committing a robbery, an armed robbery. The perpetrators and organisers and bosses of these criminal enterprises usually have relationships with police officers. Usually they have been nurtured over many years. In other words, they came across police officers when they were younger and involved in pettier crime and formed relationships. The criminal's career then advances, usually alongside the police officers, because they feed off each other. If I give you information, you'll leave me alone, and also the information will take out my opposition. I know of a police officer who was holding a gun to the heads of suspects. First he interrogated them, but all we were talking about was break-ins to houses, burglaries. So I would say most people would agree that that's overstepping the mark. When is it justifiable to hold a firearm to someone's head? Is it ever? I was involved in a case where we arrested someone that we thought that there was probably a few hundred lives at stake. And this is a real-life scenario where a cell of a terrorist organisation had planted bombs in numerous locations throughout the country. And I was involved in finding one of the perpetrators on a property. And as I came into the place where he was being detained, he was being hung over a banister by his ankles, about 30 feet up, by a senior police officer. And he told us within a few minutes the information we required. My question is whether that was justified. I think it was 100% justifiable. My only concern was that he might land on my head. The temptation of corruption is a personal thing, dependent on your personal circumstances. What we're talking about is bent cops. And that infiltrates every department of the police force up and down the country, from firearms licensing to liquor licensing to policing football. The drugs industry is a multi-billion-pound cash industry. Every part of the system becomes susceptible to the power of cash. There's a story of a police officer not too far from London who was discovered after 12 years of being a police officer that he'd been on the wage bill of an organised crime gang throughout his career. He had been getting a double salary, one from the police and one from the crime gang, who had encouraged him to join the police. What I'm disheartened by is the lack of gumption within honest police officers. If we have one dishonest police officer, we could get rid of him very early. We could identify him very early and make sure that he doesn't become a bigger problem. But we don't, because the other 99 good officers don't stand up. And there's no surprise that police officers back each other up. In fact, when you see police officers on the streets, they rely on each other to back each other up. Their lives are dependent on backing each other up, but they also do so when one of them oversteps the mark. So you've asked me about interrogation, which is an interesting word because as a police officer you would call it interview. It's now done nationwide on a tape recorded basis. All of the preparation for that interview is done off tape. So by the time it goes on tape, everyone knows their part. And the outcome of it is we might go on tape and perform as agreed for you to take responsibility for certain things and deny other things. You get my drift. For example, if I find an amount of heroin in your possession, or cannabis, or cocaine, or whatever it happens to be, that's a lever for me. Only you and I know, and possibly my colleague, that you've been caught with that amount of drugs. So whilst it's only the three of us, we can negotiate. We can lose those drugs. They can disappear down the drain. Or in my back pocket as leverage for tomorrow for another interrogation entirely. I don't regret the crime I was involved in. I don't even regret some of the violence that was involved because it was criminals that we were dealing with, it was criminals that we were hurting, it was other criminals that were suffering, and I had no regrets about that at all. The thing I regret are those relationships. It's the people that I let down. When relationships are formed in real life and they come to an end, then they're brought to some conclusion. That was never the case. I disappeared. You were forming friendships, relationships, and ultimately betraying them. The whole thing being built on deceit and lies. Every criminal organisation out there is paranoid that some of their number are speaking to security services or the police behind their back. And that's as it should be. We've got very limited resources in that regard, so we can't follow everybody all the time. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of criminals up and down the country thinking they're being followed by the police 24 hours a day. I love the idea that they live with that.